So now we'll say a prayer. People of God, be glad. Your God delights in you, giving you joy for sadness and turning the dark to light. Be strong in hope, therefore, for your God comes to save. You are God's children. Lord, make us one in the love of Christ today and forever. Amen. You are God's children. Quite a week for that sentiment, isn't it? There's no way today that one cannot address the fact that the Royal Commission into Child Sexual Abuse handed down its findings this week, and that it's fair to say that the Church comes out of it appallingly badly. Admittedly, the Catholic Church is the one bearing the brunt of the public response, and indeed a majority of the findings, but the Anglican Church has nothing to be proud of in what that report contains either. Indeed, none of the religious organisations, the major ones, even most of the minor ones, can really hold their hands up and say, we are innocent, 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 because we're not. And of course, none of this comes as a surprise, because over the past 5 years, bit by bit, we've been finding out what the commissioners have been finding out as they've released interim reports and things have been made public, and we've begun to realise just the extraordinary extent, not merely of what has occurred, but of what was tolerated as having occurred. And that for me is the most extraordinary thing, and as unforgivable as the events themselves. And so, as the churches digest this report, we need again and again and again to say to those who are victims of abuse, especially within the churches, that we are deeply and heartily sorry, both for what happened and for the fact that what happened was not dealt with by those to whom it was reported. And then, having done that, we need to go the next step, which is to provide appropriate levels of recompense to the extent that such a thing is even possible, but not to attempt to hide assets in order to defend. But then, as well as making the church a safe place for the future, we need to find a way theologically to reconceive what it is that has happened and who it is that we must be in the light of it. And actually, today's reading from Isaiah helps a lot in that regard. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me. Jesus quotes this, doesn't he? The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me because the Lord has anointed me to do what? To bring good news to the oppressed, bind up the brokenhearted, proclaim liberty for the captives, release to the prisoners, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour. That's not a bad list. That's not a bad list at all if you ask, what must the church do in response to these findings? Bring good news to the oppressed, bind up the brokenhearted, proclaim liberty to the captives, release the prisoners, and so on. But guess what? First, we've got to rebuild the trust. Because at the moment, we are not in a position as an institution to do really very much at all other than to say sorry and to do what we can in the way of compensation and of providing services for those who have been harmed. But in time, when forgiveness becomes possible, then it is time for us to try and work out how we can be once again people who are not just prepared to do these sorts of things, but to be seen by the public to be the sorts of people who do these sorts of things, rather than, as we currently are, to be regarded by the public as an institution to be avoided at all costs because look what they do. These are hard words. These are really hard words, especially if you're in leadership. There's one line in this text from Isaiah that really leaps out for me in the current climate. I will faithfully give them their recompense, and I will make an everlasting covenant with them. I will faithfully give them their recompense and make an everlasting covenant with them. When we look at things like compensation schemes and whatnot, this is not just about, paying people off for things that happened. This is about rebuilding the sort of covenant relationship that allows God back into the space where God has been pushed out by violence. That's what this is about. Bringing God back into people's lives where God has been pushed out by violence and by abuse within the institution that is supposed to represent God's presence. Because if somehow or other we can work out how to do that, if somehow or other institutionally and individually we can work out ways to do this, then the following verse will finally apply. Their descendants shall be known among the nations, and their offspring among the peoples. All who see them shall acknowledge that they are a people whom the Lord has blessed. Their descendants. It may be that for a time, and that time is now, it may be that for a time we as the church are going to have to accept that some in our society, perhaps many, are going to look at the institution as a very problematic thing. But if we do this the right way now, then our descendants, the next generation of members of the churches, will be those whom people look at and see are people whom the Lord has blessed. Why? Because we will be seen to have been a blessing to others, and particularly to those who have been harmed. There is no getting away from the absolutely, utterly hideous content of that Royal Commission report. Even the bits that we get in the press are enough to indicate. I just can't imagine what it would have been like to sit through all those hearings or even to read through the documentation that is now available. 17 volumes or whatever it is. I don't know how you'd be feeling at the end of it. I could imagine how I might be if I read the lot. But what we are called to do out of this darkness space now is to begin to envisage how it is that we get out of the darkness and back into the light. How, as we lead in this Advent period up to a point of welcoming the Christ child at Christmas, we might be able to begin the theological task of rebuilding, which begins with sorry, continues with recompense, continues further with understanding and not with lashing out at those who rightly lash out at the institutional church and its fellow travellers, and then working out how we can be authentically and truly those who bring good news, those who bind up, those who proclaim liberty, and those who offer release. If, as an institution, the church can find a way to do that, then our descendants shall be known among the nations and our offspring among the peoples as a people whom the Lord has blessed. But before that happens, there's a lot of work to do.